The rusty nail sat hunched against the harbor, like a man who'd given up on standing straight. It was the kind of place Tim Underwood used to love. Dim, smelling of brine and old beer. The kind of joint where the jukebox still played Hank Williams, and nobody asked questions if you sat alone with a glass. He hadn't been inside in 14 months. Not since the night he'd stood in the driveway of the house north of Del Mar and watched Jenny back her car out with Lacey in the passenger seat, and the last of his dignity in the trunk. Tonight, he came for the same reason he came to most things now. To test himself against the thing that used to own him. He took the stool at the far end of the bar, the one that gave him a clear view of the door and the Pacific beyond the grimy window. The bartender, a thick woman with a voice like wet gravel, slid a rocks glass in front of him without being asked. "Club soda with lime," she said. "You still doing the thing?" "I'm still doing the thing," Tim said. He didn't smile. Smiling felt like lying lately. He was 45, but the mirror behind the bottles told him he looked older, gray threading the dark hair at his temples, the kind of permanent fatigue that settled in the hollows under his eyes after the divorce. He still wore the uniform of his days, faded blue work shirt unbuttoned over a gray t-shirt, the one with the faded Boeing logo, and the faded Padres cap pulled low. CAD/CAM designer for jet aircraft parts, he spent 8 hours a day bending steel and aluminum into perfect digital curves that would one day scream across the sky at Mach 1. The irony was not lost on him. His own life had come apart in pieces that refused to fit back together. He thought about Jenny the way a man thinks about a wound that never quite closed. She was still in the house they'd bought together, the one with the bougainvillea that climbed the stucco like it was trying to escape. Registered nurse, oncology OR. She had spent 20 years holding other people's lives in her gloved hands while their own marriage quietly bled out. He had come home early one Tuesday and found her in their bed with the anesthesiologist from Scripps. The man's scrubs were still on the floor like shed skin. Tim had stood in the doorway holding the bag of takeout Thai food and felt something inside him simply switch off. Not rage, not even grief, just the clean metallic click of a circuit breaking. Lacey had been 15 then. She was 16 now. But the girl who used to run to him with seashells and questions about airplanes now looked at him the way you look at a chair that's always been in the corner, familiar, harmless, but no longer necessary. She lived with her mother. Visitation was every other weekend and every Wednesday night, but the Wednesdays had started to feel like obligations that both of them were too polite to cancel. He sipped the club soda. The lime bit his tongue. Across the bar, at the other end, a man sat alone. Tim's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The man wore the same faded blue work shirt, unbuttoned, the same gray t-shirt underneath, the same Padres cap tilted at the same angle, same 3-day stubble, same narrow shoulders, and the same way of holding his back a little too straight, as if compensating for something broken long ago. In front of him sat a rocks glass filled with amber liquid, the exact color of the whiskey Tim used to drink. Wild turkey, neat, 2 fingers, no ice that ever lasted long. The man lifted the glass exactly when Tim lifted his. Their eyes met. For a moment, the bar disappeared. The jukebox, the low murmur of fishermen and off-duty mechanics, the slap of waves against the pilings outside, all of it folded away. Tim felt the old thirst rise in his throat like a tide. He set the glass down. The other man did the same. Tim looked away, counted to 10, looked back. The man was still there, watching him with Tim's own wary, exhausted eyes. He told himself it was a trick of the light. The rusty nail was full of mirrors and shadows. But when he stood and walked slowly along the bar, pretending to head for the restroom, the man tracked him with the same half-turn of the head Tim himself would have used. Tim stopped 10 feet away. The man's face, his face, tightened with the same flicker of recognition and fear. Tim took one more step, and the man slid off his stool, turned, and walked out the side door that led to the alley. By the time Tim reached it, the alley was empty, except for a gull picking at a styrofoam box of discarded French fries. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself this again, 2 days later when he saw the same man standing at the end of the jetty at Oceanside Harbor, staring out at the same gray water while Tim tried to teach Lacey how to cast a surf rod. Lacey had looked up from the reel and said, "Dad, you okay?" And Tim had realized he'd been staring past her for a full minute. When he looked back, the man was gone. It happened again at the Vons, on Via de la Valle. Tim was buying the same frozen burritos and single-serving milk he always bought for his apartment in University City. The man was 3 aisles over by the beer cooler, studying the same 6-pack of IPA Tim used to buy before AA. Tim walked straight toward him this time, heart hammering like a rivet gun. The man glanced up, met his eyes, and simply stepped behind a display of tortilla chips. When Tim rounded the end cap, the aisle was empty, twice a week, sometimes 3. The parking lot at the AA meeting in Solana Beach, the overlook at Torrey Pines, where Tim went to watch the gliders ride the thermals. Once, impossibly, in the control room at work while Tim was running a simulation of a wing spar for the new F/A 18 variant. The man had been standing on the other side of the glass partition, staring at the same glowing green lines on the monitor. When Tim looked up from the keyboard, the reflection in the glass was only his own. He stopped telling himself it was nothing. At night, he lay in the narrow bed of his apartment and tried to name what he was seeing. A hallucination? The whiskey talking from the grave? Or something worse? Some piece of himself that had split off the night he caught Jenny and now walked the world wearing his clothes and drinking his poison. He thought about the things his sponsor, Ray, kept saying in the meetings. You're not the man you were. You're not the man you're going to be. You're the man who shows up. But showing up felt thinner every day. He saw Lacey less. She was busy with cross country and the boy who played guitar, who smelled like pot and freedom. When Tim picked her up for their Wednesday dinners, she chattered about school and her mother's new boyfriend. The anesthesiologist had been replaced by a cardiologist, a promotion in every sense. And Tim listened, his smile fixed like a man trying not to drown in regrets. Once she asked him straight out, "Do you hate Mom?" He told her no. He told her the truth, which was worse. He hated the version of himself that had let the marriage die without ever really fighting for it. The fear grew teeth. He began to wonder if the man was a warning or an invitation. One Thursday in late October, he drove north along the coast after work, past the strawberry fields and the last of the eucalyptus groves, until the road ended at a bluff above Black's Beach. The sun was going down in a smear of blood and gold. He parked the truck and walked to the edge. Below him, the Pacific hammered the rocks, indifferent and eternal. The wind smelled of salt and kelp and the faint metallic tang of the aircraft plants back in San Diego. He stood with his hands in the pockets of the same blue work shirt and thought how easy it would be to step forward. One long second of falling. Then the water would take him the way it took everything eventually. No more mirrors. No more daughter looking at him like a stranger. No more nights remembering the way Jenny used to laugh in the dark when he still knew how to make her happy. He looked down. The man was in the water. Not on the beach, not on the rocks. 30 yards out, where the rip current curled like a question mark, the man thrashed in the surf. Same cap, same shirt plastered dark against his chest, same desperate face turned up toward the bluff. The same face Tim saw every morning in the bathroom mirror. The man's mouth opened in a shout that the wind tore away. A wave broke over him. He came up coughing, arms windmilling, already being pulled farther out. Tim felt his own legs lock up. He took one involuntary step forward, the dirt crumbling under his boot, then stopped. His heart was a piston in his chest. He could feel the old thirst clawing at his throat again, the old shame, the old certainty that he had already failed everyone who mattered. If he dove in, he would be saving nothing. He would only be dragging the wreckage of himself into the sea beside the wreckage he already was. He stood there while the sun finished its slow murder of the day. The man went under once, twice. On the third time, he did not come back up. The waves smoothed over the spot as though nothing had ever disturbed them. A pelican slid across the sky, black against the dying light, and Tim understood with a clarity that felt like cold steel sliding between his ribs that the man had been waiting for him to decide. He did not decide. He simply watched until there was nothing left to watch. Later, in the truck, he sat with the engine running and the heater blowing uselessly against the chill that had settled in his bones. He thought about calling Ray. He thought about calling Lacey. He thought about driving to the house north of Del Mar and telling Jenny that some part of him had just drowned in the Pacific and that the rest of him was still standing on the bluff, trying to figure out whether he was the one who lived or the one who went under. Instead, he put the truck in gear and drove south along the darkening coast. The road curved and the headlights cut tunnels through the night. Somewhere behind him, the ocean kept its secrets. Somewhere ahead, in the small lit windows of the city, his daughter was probably doing homework or arguing with her mother about curfew. Tim Underwood kept driving. The same blue shirt unbuttoned over the same gray t-shirt, the same faded cap on the seat beside him. He did not look in the rearview mirror. He was afraid of what he might see sitting there, watching him with his own exhausted eyes, waiting for the next time he came to the edge of something he could not cross. He drove until the lights of San Diego rose up around him like a forgiveness he had not yet earned. And for the first time in 14 months, he did not stop at the Rusty Nail. He drove past it, past the harbor, past the ghosts, and kept going until the road became the long, familiar street that led to his empty apartment. He parked. He sat for a long time with the engine ticking itself cool. Then he got out, locked the truck, and walked inside alone. But he left his bedroom window open that night, so the sound of the distant surf could follow him into sleep. He wanted to remember the sound of the water closing over the man he had refused to save. He wanted to remember it every night until the drowning whales became the thing that kept him alive.